Coming to the end of the last 32 of the World Cup, and I just want to break down some of the lessons that we've learned from some of the teams that have already been eliminated from the competition. I'm going to break down Germany, the Netherlands, Ivory Coast, and Senegal, all who I think can be a bit disappointed with their campaigns. So to begin, we've got Germany. And what's the main takeaway? Well, Julian Nagelsmann, who I believe has just been sacked or resigned from his job, he's gone in any case. I think he made a couple of mistakes that were repeated across both of the tournaments that he was in charge of for Germany. So to start off, playing Sane and Wirtz as wide players. It's something that could only work in certain games, in my opinion. It's very predictable. It made Germany quite a predictable team. And what it meant was that if you sit in and make Germany attack only from wide areas, you cluster the center of the pitch and force them to go through wide areas, Germany didn't have a solution. Now, that's not to blame Sane specifically or Viet specifically, because you, as a manager, should understand who they are as players in 2026. Florian Wirtz has never been and will never be a wide player that can attack on the outside, go onto his left foot, have the pace to dribble past the fullback. That's just not his game. And especially if he's playing against a 5 at the back system, it's going to be very easy to stop him in wide areas. The only advantage that you could gain from playing a Florian Wirtz off the left is if you have him making combinations with someone else in the number 10 position or in the advanced areas in midfield, and that someone else has that kind of dribbling ability to take a couple of players away from attention, allow him to drift into areas himself, right? Nathaniel Brown, he did play well in this tournament. He offered a lot in terms of going forward and defensively. I thought he has that pace to overlap and underlap. He has the technical ability to do both as well. But it's not enough. And Paraguay set up in a 5 at the back, and it was easy for them to deal with the left. Nagelsmann's mistake was not just starting Wirtz there, but also not taking alternatives in his squad that could have offered a different way of playing, right? Knowing that Jamal Musiala was not at his very best in terms of fitness yet, not taking people like El Maya, who, he's a young player, but he had a very good season with Cologne in the Bundesliga, or even Chris Furic, who didn't have necessarily his best season, but are the profiles that can go out and attack fullbacks or wingbacks, or offer at least variety if, coming narrow is not working. Same on the right-hand side. Once you decide that Joshua Kimmich is your right back, he is playing a role, especially at age 31, where he's going to come into the center and instead be involved in build-up play rather than doing much overlapping. And that's fine. It suits as well the profile of central midfielders he chose, who were, especially with Mecha, he's more of a runner covering space, not someone who's particularly strong at deep build-up play. So those two profiles kind of worked hand in hand, but it does leave other weaknesses in terms of the wide areas. Defending really strong 1v1 dribblers. At this moment in time is not Kimmich's strong point, as he's getting older. And as I said before, he's not someone who's going to be overlapping Sane. Leroy Sane is now 30 years old, and he's never been, in my opinion, as strong on the right hand side as he is on the left. He probably has always preferred playing on the right, and hence why he's probably played more of his career on the right. But I've never agreed with that, and I just think that, it's very clear that for him to be effective on the right hand side, he needs someone overlapping him to make him less predictable. He's not an Ian Robben type or a Di Maria type. I would actually liken him more to a Gareth Bale, who you might hear that and say, Gareth Bale was great on the right for Real Madrid. Well, I think he was great when the system allowed for him to play very specific roles that got him into goal scoring areas. I always actually thought Gareth Bale, his natural game, which allowed him to be direct and run automatically in straight lines going forward, was always more effective either as kind of a second striker or off the left. But obviously, with Ronaldo on the left, if you do have someone like a Benzema, I'm going off track a little bit here, but him dropping deep and being able to open up space for Gareth Bale to come into the centre from the right offers a different type of danger. And so it worked. And that's the same with Leroy Sané. That's the scenario where you can get it to work with him on the right. But yeah, without having that, it was always going to be a tough ask for him to be consistently dangerous in this tournament. And as I mentioned previously, you had Jamal Musiala, who, you know, Germany's best player without a doubt when he's fully fit. But it was clear at the end of the season with Bayern Munich that he's not quite there yet. He's coming back from a serious injury and they're easing him back in. I still felt he was a necessary component of this team, no matter what, though. Because once you decide on those other four midfielders, you do not have enough in terms of variability, flexibility to leave him out. And what we saw in that last game when he decided for Undab and Havertz up front is essentially a 4-2-2-2 where everybody was playing very limited roles and every single person was very easy to stop, right? At least when Musiala was there in the group stage, he could drift right and left and still be dangerous, still attract players from the center to have to move out wide and give space to his other teammates, right? And not picking people like Elmaya, Karim Adeyemi, very key. Some people like him, some people don't. I think he's a very dangerous player if you understand his game, as you could say about 90% of footballers, to be honest. And not having that injection of pace available as an option off the bench was a ridiculous decision. Some of the names he picked instead, in terms of Amiri, Leveling, decent players who were just, I think the idea was to think about replacement profiles for the guys already in the squad, and that's just not enough at the top level. They are not the best squad in the tournament, so you need to have tactical versatility. You need to be open to that. And that was his job as a manager. And I think he deserves to lose his job. I think he failed in this Germany job. And I think in future, they're going to have to, be a bit more humble, I think, and acknowledge that there are different ways they're going to have to play different teams when they get to the World Cup, because they're not the best team in the tournament. They should have one of the best squads in the tournament, but I see the squad selection and the viewpoint that you can not necessarily take your most talented players, it's just because they're not going to be definite starters. I think that's quite arrogant. Next, we can have a look at Netherlands, who I won't have quite as much to say on, because I actually would say that a lot of the worries I had coming into the tournament, Ronald Koeman dealt with. I started the tournament saying this is a very good squad, but it needs very specific profiles playing. And the main one I was advocating for was Brian Brobby. Not because he's the Netherlands' best player, not because he's an amazing world-class player or anything like that. It's just simply understanding that your strengths, your key players are De Jong and Gravenberch. Then you're likely to have Reinders. That's a very good midfield. But with Reinders as a number 10 and Cody Gakpo as the left winger, these are profiles that are very reliant for them to be effective in the final third on having someone to play off. Okay, they are not the types of players who can do things and beat players and all of that, do that all by themselves. They don't have that level of versatility in their games, and that's okay. More one-dimensional players who are very good at what they are good at. That requires, when you have so many of those people in the final third, that requires somebody with hold-up play to facilitate the rest of that. And you have one of the best strikers in the world in terms of pure hold-up play in Brian Brobby. He's not always, gonna get you goals, and he got a couple of goals when he came into the team. But what you could see was Germany were a far more fluid and effective team once he was the number 9, and he learned from that lesson. And great, he kept him in the team. That was a thumbs up to Coman on that. I think playing Marlon on the right, forcing him because he'd been informed this season, wasn't the right call. And eventually, it took a lot of very good performances and goals from Somerville, but by the end, he was in the lineup as well. But the decision against Morocco to change the lineup from the 4-3-3 into a 5-2-3 was ridiculous, and it played right into Morocco's hands. To play Van der Ven as a left wing back and have De Jong and Gravenberch in central midfield against that Moroccan team, what that did was it allowed Morocco to know and be comfortable in the fact that they were definitely going to dominate the flow of the game, the pace of the game, and possession, right? And why that's such a big problem is look at who your best players are. Van Dijk as well as De Jong and Gravenberch. Those are the Netherlands' 3 best players. And by playing De Jong and Gravenberch in central midfield in a formation like that, you change their roles from being able to control, as they would have if they had an extra midfielder and had wide options that could stay wide as they would in a 4-3-3, to now having to play more of a running role. That's generally what's going to happen unless you would have very unique wing back profiles and wide centre back profiles. That's what's going to happen when you play a 5 at the back formation. You're not going to be able to control possession as easily. So you limit the strengths of your 2 best players immediately by doing that. And you could argue it nearly worked because they were 1-0 up going into the dying seconds of normal time against Morocco. But in my opinion, if they had gone toe to toe, played the 4-3-3, what we would have seen is Netherlands create more chances during normal time, better chances. And I think despite Morocco being a well set up team, they are a team that doesn't have necessarily a 1v1 outlet that they would have had if Abde was fit. And you could have definitely used that to your advantage in that game by having them spend more time defending deeper, set up from deeper and trying to attack from deep. It wouldn't have played to their advantage. And if they would have created less, they would have had less control in the game, and the Netherlands would have instead had more control and I think created more chances. And I think player for player, Netherlands still had a better team than Morocco, and he lost his advantage by making the decision to go to 5 at the back in that game, and it cost him in the end. I won't ever be able to prove it directly, but just following my logic there, by limiting your best player's strengths, you are never going to give your best your players the chance to show their very best, and that's what happened when they got eliminated by Morocco. And finally, I'm just going to look at 2 African nations who, in my opinion, were Africa's best chances of having success in this tournament. So really disappointed to see both Senegal and Ivory Coast go out in the last 32. And, slightly different changes I would have made, but at the end of the day, both stories are 2 managers who had, in my opinion, a quite typical West African ideology when it comes to how they want to set up a team, how they have to move when a team goes in front, when a team takes the lead. And I think these are lessons that are going to haunt these teams, especially Senegal, with a lot of the players in their squad. This is going to be their last World Cup opportunity. I think the truth is, we look at these squads, right? Let's start with Senegal. I would say against Belgium, they were starting 5 of their best 11. And, who was that? Let me just break that down. So, Pape Gueye, for sure. With the attack, they have options and they have depth. In fact, throughout the team, they have options and depth. But I would say that if you look at um, who was getting the opportunities over the course of the tournament, it was always the players who were more physically dominant, right? And he made that choice in every position, or the older players, right? And these are the mentalities that allow teams that aren't quite as good as you to, again, in fact, this is quite similar now that I'm saying it out loud to what Coleman was doing. Allow your opposition to now be on your level in certain areas, right? Player for player, Senegal have a better team than Belgium. I don't think that should even be a debatable question, honestly. And the lineup Belgium picked played right into Senegal's hands. They had no pace, they had no ball winning ability in that lineup. And Senegal took advantage of it in the last 16, going 2-0 up. There was no reason to then sit back and sit on your lead. Why are you doing this? You're doing this because in your mind, we're up against this more successful European nation of recent times. They've got some big name players and we have to sit on this lead. It's not only African nations that think like this, but I think it's very typical of what the bigger African nations are used to doing when they get to the world stage. And I think it definitely played into the hands of Belgium when they made that call. I think, man, it's just disappointing because Senegal had a squad that could have gone very far in this competition, in my opinion. You know, look at the depth to be able to have Papsa, Lamine Kamara, Ibrahim Mbaye, Nicholas Jackson, El Haj Malik Diouf at left back. All of those guys on the bench in that game and still be the stronger team. That shows the level of depth in the squad. Specific changes I would have made. Mamadou Sarr would have played a lot more in this tournament for me. I don't understand why Pafsis is playing ahead of him. I think that's another, symptom of what I'm talking about in the sense that Sarr's best attributes are his technical ability as a centre half. He's an all-rounder. He's a very good all-rounder, but he's very good on the ball. He's very good in the air. He's very good 1v1. And you instead pick someone who's more typically solid. And what do I mean by solid? Um, battle hardened, tested. That's the kind of thing that seems to be valued more. The fact that Pafsis is 32 years old. If you look at the exact same player, Pafsis and Mamadou Sarr, and you swap their ages around, Sarr would be playing in that game, and I have no doubts about it. Sarr is not playing because he's young, and it's not to do with who's a better player, who offers more to the team, who would allow you to control more, when you are under pressure, because that would all be Sarr. He's the one that's better on the ball. He's the one that can allow you to play out of pressure a lot better. And I'm just using him as a clear example because, it's the type of mentality they had all over the pitch. Idrissa Gana Gueye has been a key man for Senegal throughout the years, but he's approaching 37 years old. He does not need to be playing every single minute of every single game, especially when you have alternatives on the bench that have a loss of talent. Lamine Kamara, who of course had a shocker in the end when he came on, happens with younger players at times. Papsa, they should have been used in different moments of this tournament, right? Sadio Mane, of course, Senegalese legend, African football legend. But again, doesn't need to be playing every minute of every game at this stage. When you have Iliman Ndiaye, who, in the end, he finally got in the team in the last game, playing on the right, but was kind of playing a bit of a wing-back role, very deep starting position, which I think this was to allow Mane to stay up higher. You're making these allowances for him because he's getting older. You shouldn't necessarily be thinking like that when you've got alternatives like Ndiaye and Ibrahim Mbaye to fit into this squad. So these are the judgments that I think someone like Thiago is gonna have to get away from. I think he might lose his job after this. He's done a good job as manager. He's more progressive than the previous Senegal manager, in all honesty, but it's still not got to the stage where he managed to get the best out of the squad. And I think I'm even more disappointed with Ivory Coast because, for me, I don't think. Well, same with Senegal, but I don't think we once saw Ivory Coast best 11 on the pitch. I think we got close in moments, but I just really wanted to see a time where you had Diomande on the right. Why on the right? Because that's where, in my opinion, he gets to play his more natural game, where he's a more automatic threat. When he's on the left, having to cut inside, he can do that job, but his biggest strength is not his ball striking or anything like that. You know, that's not where you see the best side of him. He's someone who's very dangerous and can easily get on the outside when he's playing on the right, but then has the kind of bow-footedness and subtleness that he can come inside and still be dangerous, play very good through balls, and then also he can still score goals from the right because he's good with both feet. He's a very talented player, but I think it just suits his natural game to be starting on the right more often. Now, what that would have allowed is Ahmad to play as a number 10 or the most advanced of the three midfielders, which I think in this lineup, the way they were set up would have suited their players a lot better, right? He would have allowed Bonny to get into the game a lot more. He was an isolated figure throughout the tournament. And I think he tried to combat that by playing two up front at times, having Nicolas Pepe around. But Nicolas Pepe is just not as good a player as Amad Diallo. There's no doubt about it. He's not as good a player as Yan Diomande either in terms of their complete skill sets. And yeah, I would have had those two. And then I would have had Bazumana Toure on the left, who he's someone who's, you know, not someone who can do it all himself in terms of like Diamande beating a man, then having the ability to make the right pass. And he's someone who's very quick, very smart, makes good decisions in the final third. And when there's space ahead of him, he's very dangerous. And I think him on the left with, if you have Ahmad as your most advanced midfielder and you have Christian now as the centre mid that's starting on the left side, you've got the dribbling ability there to make the most out of Toure. You know, he played the first game with Diomande on the right, but then there was no Ahmad in that game, and no Bonny in that game, and no Christ Inal in that game. And then there were other games where Christ Inal played and Ahmad played, but then there's no Toure or Diamande's on the left and Kessier's playing. And, you know, Kessier, Sangare, Christ Inal, very solid. Makes sense to play that against Germany. Makes sense to even start like that against Norway. But I just think we never actually got to see this this team at their very best, going forwards in any case. What I would say about Ivory Coast, at least, is that they have a very young team. I think all of their best players are very young and will be better players in 2030. So assuming they qualify and everything goes all right there, I think we could see a better version of Ivory Coast in 4 years' time. And I wouldn't necessarily say their manager did a terrible job and deserves to get sacked or anything like that. But I was just a bit disappointed because I really did think if they were able to get through against Norway, I mean, another tough game was coming against Brazil, but I think anything was possible with this squad. I genuinely think they had the depth and the quality all round to challenge any team, especially on their side of the draw. So, yeah, those are my takeaways. Those 4 countries, I think, a lot to learn from the decisions that were made. Some of these decisions seem very subtle, very like they won't be the biggest deal, but they were predictable before the tournament, and I think these are things that in the end have cost a lot of these managers their jobs and have cost these nations an opportunity that only comes once every 4 years at best.